Hi, my name is Rachel Donovan. I'm 32 years old, and about 2 years ago, I was still an engineer at a robotics company my own father founded in Fort Collins, Colorado, a company I helped build from a 2-car garage into a business worth $92 million. For 9 years, I stayed quiet, stayed in the background, and let my family take credit for the work I did with my own 2 hands. I never imagined that the one thing I protected without telling anyone would be the exact thing that brought their entire plan crashing down. This is my story. We're giving all $92 million to Ethan, my father said, like he was reading off a grocery list. Then he looked straight at me. Now get out. You're done here. My mother didn't even flinch. My brother straightened his tie. And I just sat there, in the same boardroom I had built with my own 2 hands, and asked the one question nobody in that room expected. So you sold the company without my patents? My mother let out a short laugh. We sold our business, Rachel. Across the table, the buyer's lead attorney stopped writing. He set down his pen, closed the folder in front of him, and looked directly at my father like he'd just realized something very, very wrong. Before I tell you how we got to that moment, hit like and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from tonight. And let me know, have you ever watched your own family count you out, right before they found out exactly what you were still holding? Because that's exactly the mistake mine was about to make. 9 years earlier, none of this looked dangerous. Back then, Donovan Robotics was still small enough to fit in a 2-car garage in Fort Collins, Colorado. My dad, Richard, wore the same gray fleece vest to every single meeting, rain or shine. My mother, Linda, kept the books and answered the phones and told everyone who called that her son was the brains of the operation. And my older brother, Ethan, could walk into any room and have investors eating out of his hand within 10 minutes. I was different. By the time everything finally came apart in that boardroom, I was 32. But back then, in my early 20s, I was the one who preferred a quiet workbench to a stage. I wore old flannel shirts, kept my dark hair in a messy bun, and carried a battered green notebook everywhere I went. That notebook held the first sketches, the actual bones, of the adaptive sensor system that would eventually make our company worth more money than any of us could really picture. I remember the first working prototype like it was yesterday. I was 24, running on gas station coffee, elbow deep in wiring at 2 in the morning, when the sensor array finally adjusted itself around an obstacle without freezing up. I laughed so hard I woke up the neighbor's dog. Ethan took it to a trade show in Chicago the following month. And I'll give him this, he was good. Really good. He knew exactly when to pause for effect, when to smile, when to boil down something complicated into one sentence an investor could repeat over steak dinner. When someone in the crowd asked how he'd come up with the technology, Ethan glanced toward the back of the room, right where I was standing. For half a second, I thought he was going to point at me. He didn't. Afterward, my mother squeezed my shoulder and said, "Ethan just handles the spotlight better, honey. You know you hate all that." I told myself she was right. And that became the pattern. I built. Ethan presented. My father negotiated. My mother smoothed everything over. And every single time the company grew, my name somehow got a little smaller. Here's the thing my family never bothered paying attention to, though. Before Donovan Robotics ever sold a single unit using my sensor technology, I had developed the original core system on my own time, with my own equipment, using savings from a part-time job I'd worked all through grad school. A patent attorney, a friend of a friend, told me flatly, "Don't sign away ownership just because you trust your family." So I didn't. The company got broad rights to manufacture and sell products using the technology. But I kept the core patents in my own name, along with something called a change of control clause, meaning if ownership of the company ever shifted, the technology license didn't automatically transfer with it. It required my written consent. At the time, it felt like boring paperwork. Something my lawyer insisted on that I barely understood. Years later, when Ethan suddenly started showing up in closed-door meetings about a massive acquisition, and my own calendar invitations quietly started disappearing, I pulled that old green notebook out of a desk drawer and wondered, for the first time, whether my family had simply forgotten what I owned, or whether they were counting on me forgetting it too. The first time I heard the figure, I thought I'd misheard it. $92 million. My father mentioned it over Sunday dinner, cutting into his steak like he was discussing the weather instead of the biggest deal our family had ever come close to. Ethan sat across from me, swirling his wine, looking far too pleased with himself. "The buyer sees serious long-term value," he said. I noticed the word he used. Buyer. Not partner. Not investor. Buyer. Over the following 2 weeks, the closed-door meetings multiplied. Ethan was suddenly copied on every email thread. I was copied on almost none of them. Then one afternoon, a document landed in my inbox. My father called it routine paperwork, nothing to worry about. I opened it at my kitchen counter, cold coffee at my elbow, my old green notebook sitting within reach out of habit. The language was dense, pages of legal boilerplate, but one line stopped me cold. It said the acquiring company required my written consent to transfer the technology license following the sale. I read it 3 times. The next morning, my father leaned against my office doorway, arms crossed, trying to look casual. Just sign it, Rachel. Legal needs to clean up loose ends before closing. Why am I a loose end? His smile disappeared. Don't make this complicated. My mother tried the softer approach that night, calling while I was folding laundry. Ethan is under enormous pressure right now. This is his moment. Please don't turn it into some kind of ownership argument. Ownership argument. As if the patent sitting in my name were a family squabble instead of legal property. I called my old friend Marcus, a corporate attorney I'd known since college, someone I trusted when my family made me question my own judgment. Don't sign anything yet, he told me. Get independent counsel. Today. For the first time in days, I could actually breathe. Then, 3 days later, I walked past a steakhouse downtown and saw Marcus sitting across from Ethan. Laughing. A contract folder between them on the table. Marcus followed me out to the parking lot afterward. He didn't even try to lie. Ethan had offered him a senior counsel position at the newly combined company if the acquisition closed, a huge salary, a corner office, a seat at the table. You knew what they were trying to do to me, I said. He looked at the ground. I know where this deal is headed, Rachel. That stung more than I expected. So I found someone else. A patent litigator named Diane Cho, recommended by a former colleague who had no stake in any of this. Diane read through the license agreement in complete silence, then turned it toward me and tapped one paragraph with her pen. Your family can sell their shares, she said. They can sell the building, the contracts, the brand name, the equipment. But they cannot transfer your core patents without your written consent. I stared at her. What happens if I don't sign it? Diane leaned back in her chair. Then they're selling a very, very different company than the one they think they're selling. Something shifted in me right there. I still didn't know how far my family was actually willing to go, so I decided not to warn them. I wanted to see, for once, what they'd do when they still believed I was too quiet, too agreeable, too used to disappearing, to ever fight back. Once I stopped pretending everything was fine, the pattern became impossible to miss. My calendar changed first. Meetings I'd attended for years vanished without a word of explanation. My access to certain internal financial reports got quietly downgraded. Ethan started walking new engineers through the lab, introducing himself as though he'd designed the sensor arrays himself, standing right next to equipment I'd personally built. Then my father called me into his office. A single envelope sat on his desk. $60,000, he said. Clean exit. No drama, no lawyers, no mess. Inside was a severance agreement. I would resign quietly, sign the consent to transfer the patent license, waive any future claims, and agree never to publicly discuss the circumstances of my departure. I looked up at him. You want my patents for $60,000? His jaw tightened. I want you to stop acting like this company revolves around you. That sentence followed me home and sat with me all night. Diane told me not to respond emotionally, so I didn't. I declined, in writing, through counsel. That's when my mother's whisper campaign started. Subtle, at first. Rachel's overwhelmed. Rachel's taking this personally. Rachel's always struggled under pressure. People who had spent 9 years bringing me their hardest technical problems suddenly started talking to me like I might shatter if they used the wrong tone. Then came the launch gala. It was supposed to celebrate the coming acquisition, a black tie event at a hotel ballroom downtown, string lights, an open bar, investors clustered beneath a massive projected image of the company logo. Ethan worked the room like he owned it, shaking hands, laughing at every joke, soaking up congratulations for a technology he'd never once written a single line of code for. I heard my mother introduce him to a cluster of investors as the driving force behind our entire platform. I heard every word. I said nothing. Then I saw Priya, one of my junior engineers, carrying a stack of presentation folders across the room. Ethan stopped her. "You missed a formatting error in these," he said, loud enough for people nearby to hear. Priya went red. "I used the version I was given, sir." Ethan laughed. "Maybe engineering needs people who can follow basic instructions." I stepped between them. "That presentation came from my team. If there's an issue, you talk to me." His smile vanished. "You really can't stand one night not being the center of attention, can you?" I almost laughed at the absurdity of that. Then he lifted his wine glass. The motion looked accidental. It wasn't. Red wine splashed across the front of my cream-colored blouse and dark blazer. The ballroom went quiet around us. I could feel it soaking through the fabric, cold against my skin. Ethan widened his eyes theatrically. "Rachel, come on, it slipped." I looked at my father. He stared into his own drink and said nothing. I looked at my mother. She leaned in close and whispered, "Please. Don't make a scene." Something inside me finally went still, not angry, not upset. Just still, in a way I hadn't felt in years. I walked to the restroom and looked at myself under the harsh fluorescent lights. Red wine stain. Tired eyes. 9 years of excuses I'd made for people who never once made excuses for me. I opened my bag. My old green notebook was right there, where it always was. I ran my thumb along the worn cover and called Diane. "I'm done protecting them," I said. The next morning, every single communication with my family went through Diane. We pulled together emails, internal memos, payment records, badge access logs, and security camera footage covering the past 6 months. Diane formally notified the buyer's legal team, in writing, that I had not, and would not, consent to any transfer of my patents. My father pushed toward closing anyway. I think he genuinely believed $92 million made him untouchable. Then the final closing meeting invitation appeared on my screen. I closed my laptop, slipped the green notebook into my bag, and walked toward the boardroom for the last time. They had absolutely no idea what I was bringing with me. My father was already standing when I walked in. Ethan sat beside him in a charcoal suit, one ankle resting over his knee like he'd already won. My mother had a coffee cup in front of her, completely untouched. Across the table sat the buyer's negotiating team, 3 attorneys and their lead counsel, a sharp-eyed man named David Prescott. My father didn't ask us to sit down. "We're giving all $92 million to Ethan," he announced. Then he looked straight at me. "Now get out. You're done here." Nobody moved for a second. I looked at Ethan. He wouldn't meet my eyes. I looked at my mother. She almost looked relieved. "So you sold the company without my patents?" My mother let out a short laugh. "We sold our business, Rachel." Across the table, David stopped writing. He stood up slowly, closed the folder in front of him, and stared directly at my father. "This transaction has not closed," he said. The room went dead silent. "The funds have not been released. And as of this morning, we have a serious ownership problem." My father turned toward me, his face draining of color. "What did you do?" Diane answered before I had the chance to. "Rachel didn't do anything except decline to transfer property she legally owns." She slid the licensing agreement across the table. David's attorney flipped to the marked section, the change of control clause, highlighted in yellow. "The company has broad rights to manufacture using this technology," Diane continued, "but it does not own the core patents. And if control of this company changes hands, those license rights do not automatically transfer to a new owner without Rachel's written consent." David looked at me directly. "Did you sign that consent?" "No." Ethan shot up out of his chair. "This is insane. She works for us. She built the original system before this company ever existed," Diane said calmly, sliding a second folder across the table. "Dated development logs, the original provisional patent filing, notarized records going back 9 years." My green notebook sat quietly on the table in front of me, its corners worn soft from 9 years of use. My father stared down at the paperwork like it might rearrange itself if he looked hard enough. Then he tried a different angle. "This is a family disagreement. Rachel's upset because Ethan is stepping into leadership." Diane slid one more document across the table, the severance offer. $60,000 in exchange for my consent, my silence, and a full release of future claims. David read it once, then read it again, and his expression hardened into something cold. You attempted to pressure the patent owner into signing away her rights before closing, and conditioned her severance on her giving up an asset she legally controls. That is not what happened, my father said, his voice rising. That's exactly what happened, I said. Ethan slammed his palm flat on the table. You're holding $92 million hostage because you're jealous. I finally looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time in years. I'm not holding anything of yours, Ethan. His face went red. This technology belongs to the family. No, I said quietly. That's just what you all kept telling yourselves. Then Diane opened one last folder. After I'd refused to sign the consent, Ethan had quietly hired an outside IT contractor to attempt to gain access to systems containing technology he did not legally control, trying to extract source code and design files before closing, in case I never came around. There was no dramatic secret recording. There didn't need to be. There were payment records, text messages, invoices, badge logs, and a contractor who, once he understood there was a legitimate ownership dispute, had stopped the work, hired his own attorney, and agreed to cooperate. Ethan went pale. My father turned toward him slowly. What did you do? I was protecting the deal, Ethan said weakly. David's chair scraped back as he stood a second time. No. You were creating additional federal liability inside a $92 million acquisition. My mother finally set down her coffee cup. Her hand was shaking. David looked toward his own attorneys, then back at my father. We're done here. My father blinked. What does that mean? It means the closing conditions have not been satisfied, David said flatly. This acquisition is terminated, effective immediately. No funds will be released. Ethan sank slowly back into his chair. $92 million. Gone, before it had ever truly belonged to him at all. My father stared at me like I'd personally destroyed everything he'd built. But I hadn't. I hadn't touched his company. I hadn't touched a single dollar of his money. I hadn't sabotaged one piece of equipment. I had simply stopped giving my own family permission to sell me off along with everything else in that building. I picked up my green notebook. Months earlier, my father had genuinely planned to have security walk me out of that same building. This time, I walked out of that boardroom on my own 2 feet. And behind me, for the first time in 9 years, Ethan was the one left sitting there with absolutely no answer at all. The fallout didn't happen overnight, and honestly, that mattered to me. For years, my family had treated consequences like something that only ever happened to other people. But this time there was no single dramatic explosion, it came apart slowly, piece by piece. First, the buyer walked away formally, in writing. Then the company had to publicly disclose that the core technology behind its valuation couldn't legally transfer under the terms it had promised investors. Lenders started asking harder questions. Contracts that had looked airtight a month earlier suddenly needed to be reviewed by 3 different law firms. The company was still worth something, just nowhere close to what my father had convinced himself it was worth. Within a few months, my father was no longer running Donovan Robotics at all. He stepped down quietly after a string of legal disputes and mounting debt, after people who used to treat him like the smartest man in every room stopped returning his calls. My mother took it harder than he did, honestly. She had always controlled the story, who to call, what to say, which version of events made our family look put together and unified. But legal records are stubborn things. So are emails. So are timestamped security logs. Once enough facts came out, people simply stopped repeating her version of me. Rachel was emotional became Rachel refused to sign away her own patents. Rachel was difficult became Rachel insisted on getting independent legal advice. Rachel was trying to punish the family became Rachel protected property she legally owned. For the first time in her life, my mother couldn't edit the narrative. Ethan lost his position not long after that. The unauthorized access attempt became part of a formal investigation, and the people involved brought in lawyers of their own. I stayed out of the worst of it. Diane handled what needed to be handled. I didn't call reporters demanding Ethan be publicly destroyed. I didn't celebrate when his old contacts stopped taking his calls. The truth, on its own, was enough. Marcus reached out about 6 months later. We met at a quiet coffee shop near campus, the same one we used to study in years earlier. He looked older, not dramatically, just tired around the eyes. I made the wrong call, he said. I stirred my coffee. Yeah. I thought the deal was a sure thing. I got scared of being left behind. That almost made me smile. So was I. He looked at me then, maybe realizing how thin that excuse sounded once he'd said it out loud. I want to make this right. I shook my head. I don't hate you, Marcus. His shoulders relaxed. But I don't trust you either. They tightened right back up. I left before he could turn an apology into another negotiation. By then, Priya and I were already building something new, smaller, cleaner, from the ground up. Every engineer's name stayed on their own work. Every founder understood exactly what they owned, in plain English, before they ever signed anything. Almost a year after that boardroom, my mother reached out. My father's health had taken a turn, medication costs, appointments they were struggling to keep up with. She asked for money. I sat with that message for a long time. Then I called Diane. Verify the medical bills, I said. Pay the essential expenses directly to the providers. Diane paused. And your parents? They don't get access to me. I didn't send cash. I didn't demand an apology I knew was never coming. And I didn't reopen a door I'd finally learned how to close. When we gave our first major product demo, 18 months after that boardroom, I brought the old green notebook up on stage with me. Not because I needed it anymore. I wanted it there. A reminder of the woman who used to stand at the back of every room while someone else took the applause for her work. That evening, I stood by the windows of my new office, looking out over the Denver skyline, when Priya called from the conference room. They're ready for you, Rachel. I picked up the green notebook one more time. This time, when I walked into that room, nobody was waiting for Ethan. They were waiting for me. I used to think loyalty to your family meant staying quiet, giving more than you got, and forgiving faster than you were ever asked to. I was wrong. Love doesn't give anyone ownership over your work, your future, or your peace of mind. Ethan lost a $92 million deal that day. But that was never actually my victory. My real victory was walking away without needing a single one of them to admit what they'd done. Sometimes the strongest boundary you'll ever set is simply refusing to go back to the place that broke you. If this story hit home for you tonight, let me know in the comments. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more real stories about taking your power back.